This is apropos. Syria is reclaiming its rightful place among the nations of the world, says Ahmed al-Sharaa, as he becomes the first president of his country to address the UN General Assembly in almost 60 years. He used the speech to hit out at Israel for continuing its strikes on Syria despite the fall of dictator Bashar al-Assad last December, and he appealed to the international community for its support. With the details, here's Eliza Herbert.
Ahmed al-Sharaa has declared his country is reclaiming its rightful place among the world. He is the first Syrian president to address the United Nations General Assembly in almost 6 decades. And with it, he heralded in a new chapter in foreign relations, while calling for one significant change.
Through intensive diplomatic activities, Syria has restored international relations and forged regional and global partnerships and achieved the gradual lifting of most sanctions. We now call for the complete lifting of sanctions so they no longer shackle the Syrian people.
During the address, al-Sharaa lamented the past 60 years of the Assad family's autocratic rule and cited the regime's killing and torturing of innocent people as justification for overthrowing Bashar al-Assad.
The people had no means and choice but to organise themselves and to organise militarily to oust a criminal regime.
Al-Sharaa's previous affiliations with al-Qaeda still have him designated as a terrorist by both the United States and the United Nations. It is a public image he has been looking to shift. He says his government is uprooting sectarianism and that under his leadership his country can be an opportunity for peace in the region. But he needs the international community's support to manage his neighbour.
Israeli strikes and attacks against my country continue, and Israeli policies contradict the international supporting position for Syria, which threatens new crises and struggles in our region.
The Syrian president wrapped up his speech to a rupture of applause from some in the audience. As he said, his people know the horrors of war and destruction, and for that they stand firmly with the people of Gaza.
Well, for more, let's bring in Aaron Y. Zelin. He's a senior fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. Aaron, thanks for being with us on the programme this evening. So, as we say, the first Syrian leader to take the podium at such a gathering in nearly 6 decades. Just how significant for you was this address?
I think it's huge for Syria as a country, for its people to highlight that it's once again back on the world stage, not only 14 years after the civil war, but also 54 years after the rule of the Assad family, which ruled in a totalitarian manner. And for, the president of Syria, Ahmed al-Sharaa, as well as many of his supporters, they believe that this is a new beginning for them.
And remind us, why exactly did Syrian leaders stop addressing the United Nations? And was it just at forums like this?
A lot of it had to do primarily with the fact that there were so many sanctions against the country, but also, they're shunned in many ways by the United States. If you'll recall, Syria was the first country that was named as a state sponsor of terrorism. And so they've always had a poor relationship with the United States. And of course, a lot of decisions, even related to the UN, the US has a check on.
Well, let's talk a little bit about Ahmed al-Sharaa then, because you mentioned terrorism. He's still actually on a UN sanctions list for terrorism. He's quite different, really, from most of the other world leaders who would have been gathered in that hall today, isn't he?
Yeah, I mean, he had to get a special dispensation to travel to New York City and to address the UN General Assembly as a consequence of still having sanctions related to terrorism from the UN Security Council. And the only way to change that is there for it to be a unanimous agreement between the 5 countries. And so while the US has called for this to happen, countries like China have been apprehensive because there's a number of Chinese Uyghur foreign fighters that are within the new Syrian military. And so in many ways, it's a battle between these countries on whether this happens or not. But for now, at least, there's been this special dispensation to allow him to at least speak on behalf of his country.
Well, apart then from reclaiming Syria's rightful place, as he put it, among the nations of the world, what were his priorities there today?
I think part of it is to try and reintroduce Syria to the world under his rule, now 9.5 months since the fall of the Assad regime. Two is to highlight sort of the suffering that they're dealing with and what they're trying to overcome now through reconstruction, rebuilding the economy, and noting that they've been able to develop a lot of relations with many countries such as Turkey, the Gulf states, the US, Europe, and others, and that they're beginning the process of trying to heal the country through developing a transitional justice commission, even if many might be skeptical of it, considering the fact that the government or forces adjacent to the government since the fall of the regime have also been involved in two massacres, one against Alawites in March, and then the more recent one 2 months ago in July against Druze. And so it's a complicated picture.
Yeah, and are tensions then still extremely high following that deadly violence? How has al-Sharaa managed to actually integrate people back into Syrian society?
Well, they've developed a transitional government. They're in the process of trying to do an electoral process. Obviously, it's more of an indirect election than sort of a representative election that you typically see in, say, a Western country. They've also been doing a lot of dialogues with many different communities, but some people are still skeptical of his rule and therefore are holding out for now. But if you're just on the ground on, say, a day-to-day basis, it seems relatively normal considering the fact that many are worried about, security and things along those lines. You don't feel as if there's any problems. And I was just there last week, so.
And what were your impressions of how the country has changed then since the fall of the dictator back in December?
I think last week compared to when I was there in April, there's possibly more of a disconnect between the government and the new elite and many just average regular residents. In some ways, there's a new bubble in Damascus. And so while many are happy that there are a lot more freedoms now and that they're not being randomly harassed, they also don't feel that they know how to deal with any problems they have in their life or grievances that they have and how to rectify it through the government. And so there's definitely some more alienation on the ground than maybe there was 5 months ago when I was there.
And there's also ongoing tension with Israel, of course. We're hearing tonight about those talks involving the US and Israel and Syria over a potential security arrangement. What would that actually result in, do you think? Will it see Israel stopping these attacks on Syria and withdrawing troops from the south of the country?
As far as I'm aware, many describe it as sort of a 1974 plus agreement, since there originally was the 1974 border agreement between the former Assad regime and Israel after the 1973 war. But the Israelis want to keep the rest of the Hermon Mountain and have talked about withdrawing from the zone that was created between the two territories, which they took over after December 8th. But they also want to secure support for the Druze in the southwest and Sweda as well. At the same time, when I was there last week, I had the opportunity to actually speak with Sharaa, and he said that even if they have a deal, they aren't sure that they'll trust that the Israelis won't violate it in the same way that we've seen that even though there was a ceasefire in Lebanon now for months, we still see Israel being involved in some airstrikes here and there. But at the same time, Syria is not in a very advantageous position because the country has been destroyed by 14 years of war, and Israel does have, military supremacy in this area.
And without then that kind of a basic trust that you would presume would be fundamental when you're putting in place an agreement with a nation such as Israel, how does al-Sharaa, how did he tell you that he thinks all of that is going to actually work out?
I think part of it will come down to whether the U.S. can help guarantee this deal on some level. But at the same time, in the aftermath of the recent Israeli strike on Hamas figures in Qatar, people are also questioning whether the U.S. is to be trusted as well. And so Syria is not in the best position. In many ways, they're at the whims of what Israel wants or plans to do, and therefore that's why some, are skeptical that even if there is a deal, it'll lead to complete, stoppage of any hostilities by the Israelis against whatever they're trying to accomplish in Syria, which many still are not quite sure what they're doing at this point.
And when it comes to the US, is there still, a large degree of wariness there about al-Shara's jihadist past? And do you think he's going to succeed in convincing Washington to get rid of the remaining sanctions that are in place against Syria?
I think for people in Trump's team, they're full speed ahead. There was a policy review after the massacre in Sweden. However, they are going forward with a very good relationship and see it as an opportunity for U.S. business as well as a deep security relationship. We recently just saw the commander of U.S. Central Command meeting with Sharaa. There's more apprehension amongst some members of Congress, especially those that are in the pro-Israel camp. And so there's a give and take now between sort of the executive branch and some people in Congress. But generally speaking, the approach of Trump himself has been to undo all sanctions related to Syria. It just maybe might take a little bit more time than originally planned as a consequence in the aftermath of what happened in Sweden.
Zelin, thanks so much for being with us on the programme this evening. We do appreciate your time.